Star Wars Jedi Survivor has lots of mechanics to keep in mind, so it's quite easy to miss out on a few. There were many mistakes I made early on that I kinda wished I knew earlier, as it would have saved me a lot of trouble. In this video, we're going to talk about some of the biggest mistakes I was also guilty of in the hopes that you don't repeat them. A like on the video would help a ton, and let's get started. Coming up to number 1, the game makes a point early on how scanners are useful at identifying and providing more contextual information. It's just that for some reason this ends up being one of the most underutilized feature in the game, at least it was for me personally. You normally tend to scan things after fights anyway, especially enemies. However, in doing so, you're kinda missing out on going in well prepared. By just pulling up the BD scanner before any encounter or when fighting a new threat, you get the same information as you would otherwise and get some great combat tips on top to help you against your next enemy. It's also a good idea to take a look at the helpful tips in the tactical guide, as many times there are entries that help you better deal with certain enemies or their attacks instead of just slashing away at them like a madman. Plus, there's a neat achievement to help you with that too, so totally worth doing. Speaking of being tactical, at number 2, there's nothing more cool than using your enemy's own tools against them, especially rockets and grenades, and certain powers can be combined in very interesting ways with this. I really liked using the twin pull on enemies or groups that shoot multiple rockets at the same time. Normally, the tooltip for the skill says that you can use it on enemies to basically pull 2 targets at the same time, but actually it works on explosives just as well. In this case, you can grab and hold 2 rockets from the ATs, for example, at the same time, and then unleash them back with devastating force. For way too long, I was instead trying to rely on the force push, which is actually still pretty decent, but the time window for reaction is much lower. In the case of the pull, you can actually hold these explosives for a couple of seconds, so you have a much bigger reaction window, and you can also assess the situation to know exactly where you want to throw these back at. However, keep in mind that you don't want to keep them for too long, as they can still explode, especially the countdown grenades, as they go off in no more than 2 seconds. Rockets, however, can be held for a lot longer, but I'd still not overdo it, as otherwise the risk is too great. Moving on to 3, one of the biggest combat tricks I should have focused on earlier is to switch stances super often, as some of the combos you can pull off with this are simply stunning. To give you a few examples, one of my favorites right now is to use the focus parry from the dual wield and immediately transition into a vortex dive from the double wield. This is what I call the ultimate stamina destroyer because it completely guard breaks even the toughest enemies in no time. So you will want to start with the focus parry, which is already great for the stagger, and during it immediately transition to the double stance and then follow up with L1 plus square to do an instant vortex dive. This is going to completely shatter the stamina bar, leaving the enemy wide open for incoming attacks. Similarly, this works great with the crossguard as well, but on the slower enemies, and it can also deal a bit more damage. So in this case, you will want to also start with the focus parry, but then quickly stance switch to the crossguard and follow up with the uppercut slash to throw the enemies on their backs. The range on the skill once fully upgraded is really high, and it also deals a lot of damage, so you can easily destroy any following enemy. I also talked about just how good versatility perk is in the previous video, providing you an extra damage buff whenever you switch stances. So this is another way to combine this for some really awesome results and maximize that damage. Moving on to number 4, Blaster Stance has a really awesome secret, which actually is quite obvious when you think about it, because this has the best on-the-fly counterattack right after the dual wield. Specifically, its point-blank ability isn't just great against normal enemy attacks, but also works unbelievably well against red unblockable ones. So just like the usual, you can quickly do a point-blank as the enemy is doing the red attack. This doesn't just do the extra damage, but provides a second advantage. Since point blank slows time for a bit over 1 second, that gives you plenty of room to also move out of the way and leave unharmed, so it's kinda like also a way to dodge attacks. Some red attacks can even be completely interrupted if you can throw enemies on their back. Plus, I found that the wind up on many of these red attacks is so long that it literally extends the window needed to pull off the point blank attack. It also works very well on boss enemies, especially the duo Ogdo fight if you have trouble with that. For their normal attacks, you can completely stagger and push them back with one single hit, which is also going to completely interrupt their follow-up attacks. This is something that they often do where they do these series of bites, but you can completely interrupt that right from the first one. Plus, ambidexterity perk we talked about in yesterday's video also lets you buff your melee hits with any time you do a blast attack first, so totally check that video out to find out how you can do the best combos. At number 4, let's talk about tactically dying. Yes, I am serious, that's actually a good way to defeat some of the tougher encounters. And that's because of the restore mechanic, which works kind of like revenge from other similar games. Once an enemy kills you, you can normally grab and restore back your HP, force, and also the lost XP in this case. But actually, it also restores the blaster charges in this game too. So this means you can leave it off in the boss room and only grab it when you're out of stim heals or as a last resort to an otherwise tough encounter. Even if you don't want it for the heal, it's still quite useful as it immediately restores any of your force as well as the blaster charges. So it's quite a viable way to spam your strongest abilities or blaster attacks right from the start and then resume fighting the normal way to take down the bosses. At number 6, photo mode is more useful than just taking nice screenshots. In fact, it's an amazing tool for exploration as it can reach places Cal cannot on his own. You can pop the free cam mode quickly and scout ahead any area that might appear otherwise inaccessible at first. This lets you look at any possible entrances and ways to reach these areas or any device that you might be missing out on that you're not seeing from your current view. Furthermore, I also like using the spotlight feature to light up especially dark areas like the underground or the caverns that you oftentimes visit. For example, in one of these situations, I could not figure the exit to a cave because it was simply too dark. So using that spotlight helped me a ton to reveal the wall that was right in front of me, which otherwise I wasn't even able to see in the first place. At number 7, if you ever needed more incentives to talk to random strangers, then playing Jedi mind tricks and getting extra rewards is yet another one. You can even accidentally skip a lot of dialogues from NPCs and a lot of rewards simply because the game just drops off these conversations abruptly. But you can actually talk with them again, which is going to open up the possibility to use your Jedi powers, mind control them, and convince them to do or not do certain things. Oftentimes, this either means you can open up certain inaccessible areas or locked doors, which usually holds extra reward caches that these NPCs have stashed away. There are even occasions when you can do the same with enemies, albeit only a few and much later, to open up areas that you might need special powers to pass through. Usually the dialogues are also very funny and it saves you the hassle of doing it yourself. Moving on though, on many occasions you'll find these loot droids that hold the various currencies like Jedi scrolls, data discs, or even shards, but the game makes a point how they can only be destroyed using lightsaber attacks, whereas force powers and even blaster shots will just make them immediately escape. So if you accidentally did it the wrong way and could not get them in time, you can simply reset them by just going at any meditation point and resting. It's worth it since you can then spend those currencies at vendors and it's usually really close by, so you can do it in no time. At number 9, speaking of doing things yourself whenever you're stuck not knowing how to progress, you can get more contextual hints by holding down arrow down on the D-pad and then asking BD for help. Technically, if you finish the game, you don't really need these anymore, but if you still have lots to discover or are stuck in certain puzzles, this can help quite a bit with some of the extra hints. It's not always as useful as it seems, as Cal can also just have normal dialogues with BD1, but oftentimes it can give you those extra hints that can go a long way. And finally, to number 10, I'm sure that nobody uses the sprint any longer, but rather the air dash to move much faster. But have you wondered how much of a difference does that make? Well, it's actually lower than you think, but still quite acceptable. So on a flat terrain without any buffs, doing a test run, I was able to reach this precise line at the lift area in around 8 seconds. Meanwhile, if I were to use the sprinting mode, it took me around 11 seconds. Yeah, I was also surprised because I could have sworn I'm at least twice faster, but no, it's just like a 30% increase, if that at best. And no, ramps doesn't seem to help with that either, even though technically speaking you're landing faster. In reality, I ran the same one on this slight slope and it took me 10 seconds sprinting compared to 7 seconds with the air dash. So yeah, I guess it's still useful, but not as big as you think. In any case, that's pretty much it with today's video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.